Gurve Gaurachandraya Radhikaya Tadalaye Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tad Bhaktaya Namo Namaha. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Jutaha Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namane. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Desha Tarane. Namo Vishnupadaya Radhikaya Priyatmane Shri Srimad Bhakti Vedanta Narayan Iti Namane. Shri Krishna Lila Katane Sudaksham Audaure Madhurya Gunaishcha Yuktam Varam Varenyam Purusham Mahantam Narayanam Tam Shirashanamami Tridandinam Bhakta Shiromanim Cha Shri Krishna Padabja Dritaika Hridi Chaitanya Lilam Rita Sarasaram Narayanam Tam Satatam Prapadye Vandeham Shri Guru Varam Shri Rupanuga Pravaram Vraja Rasa Rasikam Cha Narayanam Tam Prapannam. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Goswami Niti Namane. Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Namo Mahabhadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namane Gaura Chise Namaha. Nityanandam Namastubhyam Premananda Pradayane Kalo Kalamashanashaya Janava Pataye Namaha. Vande Shri Krishna Chaitanya Nityananda Sahodito Gaudaye Pushpavanto Chitro Shamdo Tamonudo Panchatattvatmakam Krishnam Bhakta Rupa Swarupakam Bhaktavataram Bhaktakyam Namami Bhakta Shaktikam. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostude Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Bhaktya Vihina Aparadha Lakshay Kshiptascha Kamadi Taranga Madhye Kripamai Tvam Sharanam Prapanna Vrinde Namaste Charanara Vindam. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. first of all, I offer my unlimited Dandavat pranams and my Shraddha Pushpanjali at the lotus feet of my most worshipable beloved Gurudev, Nitya Leela Pravishta, Om Vishnupad Paramahansa, Asto Tarasata Sri Srila A.C. Bhakti Vedanta, Swami Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada. Then I'm offering my same unlimited Dandavat pranams and my Shraddha Pushpanjali at the lotus feet of my most worshipable beloved Siksha Gurudevs, Nitya Leela Pravishtom Vishnupad, Paramahansa Astatarasata Sri Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Goswami Maharaj. And on his divine transcendental Avirbhav Mahamahotsav Titi, starting tomorrow, I'm offering my unlimited Dandavat pranams to Nitya Leela Pravishtom Vishnupad, Paramahansa Astatarasata Sri Srila Bhakti Vedanta Narayana Goswami Maharaj. And my Dandavat pranams to the lotus feet of all of my Sri Rupanuga Guru Varga. And my Dandavat pranams to all the Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis all over the world, and especially here in New Braj. Some very saintly personalities have descended onto our New Braj festival. They're all decorating and getting ready for tomorrow's festivities. And we're very happy that this year we can host this wonderful event with many Vaishnavas coming. So I have two harmonists, raise the harmonist in front of me, and one is the memorial edition of Sri Vyas Puja of Srila Gurudev, which was printed on Moni of Amavasya of 2011. That means this, or tomorrow is the Moni of Amavasya of our Gurudev. That's his appearance day. He appeared on Amavasya day, especially Moni of Amavasya. But there's some significance, I can't quite remember astrologically, but Pujapad Madhav Maharaj, Bhaktivedanta Madhav Maharaj, he told something about the speciality of that particular Amavasya. Did you remember any of that?
Moni means silence.
Wasn't it the when Lord Shiva broke his silence after he went into, like, after Sati
Immolated herself.
Immolated, and he was so furious and
Yeah.
he went into.
Okay, yeah, see. I can't remember what was the secret, but that's probably it. Yeah, something auspicious. I also have his disappearance day anniversary edition in 2011, but this is more appropriate. I wanted to read this evening so that we can begin to hear the glories of Srila Gurudev, and then tomorrow we'll be hearing from so many different Vaishnavas, from their heart Pushpanjalis to Gurudev. So in this Raise the Harmonist, I wanted to select one that I would read. Yeah, so
you wanted Pran Kishor Prabhu's.
Someone mentioned that would be nice, but we'd have to find it. That's the whole thing.
It's on page 170.
One what?
170.
Oh, you have the same thing. I didn't notice. 170.
No, the other book.
Oh, the other one. Not this one. Okay. But there's one, I think, in this one also, no? Maybe not. Okay. Yeah, good idea. We will read Pran Kishor's, since he's not going to be here. We'll read his offering. It's actually, I remember, very, very wonderful. And there he is. There's Pran putting a garland on Srila Gurudev. Yeah. I think that's when Gurudev came to his house across the road. Okay. Where does it begin? Is it underneath that picture or before it? Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. It's titled A Humble Pushpanjali at the Lotus Feet of My Divine Master. I offer my prostrated obeisances at the divine lotus feet of my Diksha Guru, His Divine Grace, Sri Srimad Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. I offer my full Dandavat Pranam at the divine lotus feet of my Siksha Guru, His Divine Grace, Srila Bhakti Rakshat Sridhar Maharaj. And finally, I offer my full prostrations at the divine lotus feet of my Siksha Guru, His Divine Grace, Sri Srimad Bhaktivedanta Narayana Goswami Maharaj, Srila Gurudev. Dearest and most beloved Srila Gurudev, the year was 1978, and I used to dress Sri Sri Radha Govinda in the New York temple. My god brother would play a recording of a bhajan tape while we dressed and decorated Thakurji. So this is just after our Srila Prabhupada departed. And there were recordings of another great Vaishnava personality whose singing was extremely powerful. And so Pran is telling the story. So while they were dressing the deities, some devotee would bring in this tape recorder and then they would play. So the songs were captivating. Vibhavati Shesha, Ye Anilo Prema Dhana, Emona Duramati, Hari Harai, etc. Every day I would dress Thakurji and listen to these sound vibrations, and something soon began to touch my heart. So I inquired, who is the person singing these bhajans? And I was told that it was you, Srila Narayana Maharaj, the devotee who placed Srila Prabhupada in Samadhi. Your voice was the sweetest and most powerfully captivating sound vibration I had ever heard. I was told by someone that you were the most renowned kirtaniya in the whole Gaudiya Math. Days passed into weeks, and weeks passed into months, and as a ritual we would play that same recording each morning. Something must have gradually entered my heart, because at some point I made a quiet declaration to myself. I must find him and I must serve him. So one year, in the early 1980s, I was in Vrindavan and eagerly began to inquire from the local devotees about how I could locate you. Go to Keshavji Gaudiya Math in Mathura, the place where Srila Prabhupada was given sannyas, I was told. Full of eagerness and like a small child, I embarked for Mathura, unaware of the profound change that was about to take place in my life. When I reached the top of the stairs in the mutt, I could see the temple room and the deity doors. I looked to my left, and I saw you sitting in a chair, looking straight ahead, chanting on your mala. No one else was there, and no one was looking at me. I just stood there, staring at you, my heart beating faster and faster. I knew it was you, although I had never seen a photo of you. Something more than mystical was happening to me as I stood there for at least 2 or 3 minutes just looking at you. A revelation came to my heart. You are again in the presence of Srila Prabhupada. That's the revelation that came to his heart. I remembered some words from a tape of Pujapad Srila Sridhar Maharaj that was being circulated. On that tape, he said, "Follow your heart. Follow your heart. The heart will never lie." I approached you and I paid my pranams. You looked at me with your bright blue eyes and suddenly smiled broadly as if you had been sitting in that chair waiting for me. That was all it took. My heart was captured, stolen, overwhelmed. I sat at your feet. It felt as if we had found each other again. In December of 1984, I came to stay for some time in Mathura. During this stay, you so kindly fulfilled my desire for seva to you. It was out of your causeless love and mercy that you did so. You can sit on the chair if you want.
Is this yours, Mom?
No,
It's just there.
just put it on the floor. So during this stay, in December of 1984, when I came to stay for some time in Mathura, you so kindly fulfilled my desire for seva to you. It was out of your causeless love and mercy that you did so. A large plot of land had been donated to you near Seva Kunj, and you brought me there to view it. We walked around the plot together, and you described to me in vivid detail what your plans were. You eventually pulled out a large paper with an intricate architectural drawing of the mutt plans in its entirety. Personally, to my own eyes, all I could presently see was an empty plot of land with a small hut that had been dilapidated by what appeared to have been a fire. When I left Mathura that time, my life changed drastically. For the next 6 years, I spent all of my time collecting to assist in the construction of Rupa Sanatan Gaudiya Math. I spoke of you to all of my friends and godbrothers. Some became very eager to meet you. It was an amazing and exciting time. I felt such purpose to my life. We were always exchanging letters, and sometimes you would say, "Please come soon or we will feel some difficulty." I would come 2 or 3 times a year with my various collections. Some of my friends, although not having yet met you, would also help generously. I used to love placing large stacks of rupees all around your feet and your body as you sat on your bed. And at those times, Naveen Prabhu, who later became Bhaktivedanta Vaman Maharaj, would always tightly lock the door. Once you said, "I feel that I am just dreaming, that you have just placed all of these rupees on my bed. Will I wake up?" Gurudev said, "You were so kind and loving to me. It seems that you were always worried for me." I remember your embracing me and holding me tightly to your chest. I could feel your heart beating.
Wow.
One year when I was leaving, it was winter time. You noticed that I was wearing a short sleeve shirt, and you said that I was like a vairagi, and I would be cold traveling through so many countries. To my shock, you removed your own saffron sweatshirt from your body and handed it to me, ordering me to put it on. A few brahmacharis were in the room and they looked somewhat stunned. I refused to put the shirt on, and I said that instead I will place it on my altar and worship it, but you strongly insisted, so I squeezed into it. The sleeves came only to my forearms, and the chest and shoulders were so tight. I never felt so warm in my whole life, so loved. You laughed and embraced me. I was at a loss for words. Years later, in the 90s, when I was with you at Rup Sanatan Gaudiya Math, you pointed to the pillars and the various structures, and you said, "You have done this." I remember when Pran told us that. That was in 1994. Tirtha Prabhu also remembers that, Pran had not come to see Gurudev from when was the last time? 1987 or something, 88. He hadn't come to see Gurudev, and then Gurudev told in some months later, maybe it was the end of 88 or the beginning of 89, because that's when Rup Sanatan had its grand opening. Srila Vaman Raj came and all of that. And then he received a letter from Gurudev saying, "Now it is enough," saying, "No need to send more," right? But then began a very interesting development, that what he was able to do in his collections diminished greatly. Not to the point of poverty, but just it became more difficult. And then he wasn't able to go to India until all of us decided to go that same year in 1994. That was my first time going for Rajmandala Parikrama. Was that your first time for Parikrama? No? Which year did you go?
I went with Pran. Me and him together, we went with Gurudev and Parikrama. It was in Kartik.
Kartik what?
Right after Srila
88? 89? Okay.
87.
Srila Srila Maharaj left in 88.
Left in 88.
Yeah.
Just before.
Okay. So anyway, there was a lot of us that were going that year. And it was a very momentous year, to say the least. And it was also the last year that ISKCON leaders were accepting Gurudev and coming there. So, at any rate, when Kartik began, because we came about like a month, I came about a month before Kartik, and we were there for the Vishwarup Mahotsav, and that's the famous event in which the ISKCON leaders were there, because it was the sannyas day of our Srila Prabhupada. And for many years in a row, Srila Gurudev was inviting all of the ISKCON to come there, and he would host a festival in honor of Prabhupada's sannyas day. It happens to also be the sannyas day of Srila Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Maharaj. On another year, when he took sannyas in Katha, the same place and the same exact spot where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took sannyas, from Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, awarded sannyas to Param Gurudev at that time. So, anyway, then Kartik month started to approach, and we began to move to Vrindavan. Before that, we were staying in Mathura. And also there's the parikrama prior to Vrindavan, which they usually Even now, they begin like a couple of weeks before Kartik begins. So they do the Mathura Parikrama. So now Pran told me this story personally that he's now going to narrate. When we came to Rup Sanatan and all the Vaishnavas moved there, then that was the first time in quite a number of years, and the first time that Pran saw the construction, the completed construction of Rup Sanatan. So Gurudev took him up on the first floor, above the ground floor. And just at the top of the stairs, Gurudev, there was a railing there, and then there's like, what do you call it, veranda that goes all the way around, all the way up to the Seva Kunj paintings in that Seva Kunj there. So then Gurudev was standing there with Pran, and he gestured to Pran. He said, you pointed to the pillars and the various structures, and then you said, you have done this. I would strongly object and say, no, you have done this. Arguing back and forth, I finally said that Krishna had done it for you. Krishna can only do, then you replied, Krishna can only do preraka. You replied and then walked away laughing. Preraka, my previous name, means one who has been sent. Have you ever heard that before? Yeah. So in the late 80s and the early 90s, a small devoted group had taken shelter of your lotus feet. You began to elaborately speak upon topics related to our ultimate sadhya. You described Radha Dasyam in all of its splendor and glory. You gave us deep commentaries and sweet leelas from Ragvart Machandrika, Ujjvala Nilamani, and other Goswami Granthas. You instructed us to perform bhajan with the single aim of an ekantik Braj Bhav mood directed towards Radha Dasyam in the line of Sri Rupa. You warned us not to cultivate any activities that would create Purush Bhav. What's the meaning of Purush Bhav?
Thinking I'm the Lord or the enjoy.
Yeah. Enjoying sense of identity that I'm the enjoyer. Purush Bhav. So, you warned us not to cultivate any activities that would create Purush Bhav. You thoroughly clarified the Manobhishta and the speciality of Srimad Mahaprabhu and the deep meaning of Rupanuga. It was like a new awakening for us, the next phase of our spiritual life, a continuation of what Srila Prabhupada had brought us. You were slowly changing us. You once told Champaklata, who used to come and stay in India for 4 to 6 months with our girls, that I want to transform you so much that when Pran Kishor comes, he will no longer recognize you. Now, next section. Coming to the west, Prem Yuga, the second Hare Krishna explosion. None in your group of devotees ever conceived that you would leave India. I remember we used to talk that, oh, if only Gurudev could come to the west. Srila Sridhar Maharaj couldn't come, he was so elderly and not well. But we would fantasize about this, you know. We would fantasize about it. So none in your group of devotees ever conceived that you would leave India. When preparations were being made for you for your first Western tour, you called me to your room and you told me that your Guru Maharaj had come to you and instructed you to go and preach in the West. You also told me that you had promised Srila Prabhupada that you would preach in the West and that you would surely fulfill that promise. I will never forget how, shortly thereafter, we saw you disembarking out of the gate at LAX in 1996 for the first time. Yeah, I was also there. We had been waiting for Gurudev to come. And it was, I think, about a month-long wait, because first he went to Holland, and then he went to England, and then he went to Houston. So I was called up on the phone by Vishnu Prabhu in Houston, and he said, we need you to organize Gurudev's West Coast tour. And I said, oh, okay. At that time, Gurudev didn't have any, very few Western followers, very few. So somehow or other, they decided that I should take this seva. And so I remember calling up Kasturi Devi in the Bay Area. And also Kilimba, she was up here in Badger. So I began to discuss with her, because she lived in Oakland, she actually had a place, and what we were trying to do was to find who will host our Gurudev, who will host him, And so, yeah, it was not easy. I actually first approached the GBC and Guru, who lived in LA and was co-GBC in LA, and you know who that is, Veerabahu Prabhu. It just so happened that his wife, who also is a follower of Gurudev, and she lived in Vrindavan most of the time, and was attending a lot of those early 90s classes, like Shamarani was there and others, Vrindavan Vilasini, and so she happened to be there. I'd never really personally met Veerabahu, but so I just came up to his apartment door across the street on Watsika, and I rang the doorbell. And then he came to the door.
What's his wife's name again?
Well, his wife's name was given in initiation from Prabhupada, Katha.
Oh, Katha, right.
But Srila Gurudev actually gave her a nickname, like he gave to Shamarani and to Pran Kishor. And you know what her nickname was? Huh?
I know her, but I don't
Yeah,
know.
Gaur Priya. Gurudev gave her that name, Gaur Priya. So she kind of knew me, because this was 96 and I had been coming to the Kartik since 94. And so when Veerabahu came to the door, I introduced myself. I said, my name is Guru Das, and I'm a disciple of Srila Prabhupada, and actually I'm also like a secretary for Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayana Maharaj. And I just came to inform you and maybe to have a little discussion with you about his coming, because he's coming to Los Angeles. And he said, he is? Come in. I came in, and there was about 4 hours of discussion. And of course, Gaur Priya was there. She was there. And, he was very respectful, and, he was even saying that I do accept Narayana Maharaj as a, what did he put it, fully perfected spiritual personality. That's how he addressed. And so anyway, eventually he came around to the point of saying that because I mentioned to him, we need a place to host him. And since there's been some friction with the ISKCON leadership, especially since Gurudev left India, they started to propagate negativity against him right there in LA, in fact. Like Hridayananda Maharaj held a class before Gurudev came. He's warning everybody, this person's coming. Don't look at him, don't come close to him, like that. So anyway, he eventually said that, actually, I have a schedule and I'm not really going to be here in Los Angeles at that time when you say that he's coming. And but I also have a co-GBC named Badrinarayan, and then he explained to me that there's not really going to be much success in trying to approach him for that. So he just kind of wished me good luck. And then at that point, somehow there was one devotee named Rohini Nandan. He was a very operatic kind of singer. And I became acquainted with him, and he actually told me, he says, there's a whole temple, Indian community, ISKCON temple in Fullerton. So I have contact with them, and we can try to ask them if they'll host Pujapad Narayana Maharaj. So, and that Rohini Nandan, he so much loved all these kirtan tapes and recordings of Srila Narayana Maharaj, because he himself was a singer and like that. So he called up there, and I think it was him that actually initially arranged it, right, with the leaders of that temple. So I thought, okay, it's in the bag. We got a place for Gurudev to come to and to be hosted, And then after that, I flew to Malaysia because I had to make some money to be able to go on the tour. And we were, selling paintings, Pran and me and all Gaur Govinda Maharaj's disciples. We were making money there. So I flew to Malaysia, made some money, and came back. I was there like 3 weeks or something. And I came back about 1 week before Gurudev's time of arrival. But as soon as I came back, I began to hear that a monkey wrench had been put into the whole plan by the ISKCON leaders, who were hearing that he's going to be hosted there. And then they began to call those Indian-bodied, mostly Gujarati leaders of that temple, and to explain to them that our GBC does not approve of anyone hosting him in our ISKCON, and your relationship with our GBC will be damaged if you go ahead and host him. So then they contacted, and they said that we can't host him. And this is like 1 week before Gurudev arrived. So when I arrived, there had already been this going on for a number of days. And Kalimba Didi, who was up here in Badger, she began to call and talk to the people. And she also called up Agni Dev Prabhu, who was very well known to all of those people because he had been the Laguna Beach temple president for about 10 years. And so he also did make some effort, but I think Kalimba is the one that pushed it over the edge and just told them that, this is going to be an offense, that you promised to such a personality and then you don't host him. So what they did was they agreed, okay, we'll host Maharaj, but only with his immediate, servant and like that. No one else. All right, so anyway, we had their acceptance. So we still had that place. Then in the meantime, Kalimba, she was living up here in Badger. So she also began to introduce to all the devotees that Srila Gurudev would be coming. Like a little bit more than a week after he would arrive in LA, that he'd be coming up to Badger. And I arranged in Bakersfield along the way, because I knew the Indian community there quite well. They were all like hotel owners and stuff, because I used to stay in one hotel there, Patel Hotel, of course. And that person, while I was staying at his hotel over a period of like months, you know, he was becoming so interested. He would see the altar that I have in the room and chanting. And we became very close. Forget his name. Babubai? No. Anyway, he arranged with the whole Indian community in Bakersfield to host Srila Gurudev for 2 nights and have programs in Bakersfield along the way. So one wealthy person in the community hosted Gurudev at his house, and there was another man who was very wealthy, and he was building a Best Western hotel just at the juncture of Highway 5 and Highway 99, right? Brand new. And so he arranged for all of us to stay in that brand new hotel and gave us rooms and all of that. So we would drive from there to Bakersfield for those couple of days. Yeah, so that was set up. And then Kasturi, she was up in the Bay Area, and she had met one old devotee friend of hers that she knew from the early 1980s from the Berkeley Temple, where she was living at that time. And his name was Vaishnav Ananda, and he was like a disciple of Tamal Krishna Maharaj, but prior to that he had been a disciple of Hansaduta, who had left, and all of that. And now he had come to Srila Gaur Govinda Maharaj, because he didn't feel much connection with Tamal Krishna Maharaj. And Gaur Govinda Maharaj had just passed away. Remember? Like in end of February. And this is like, what, May or June? I forget exactly. Yeah, around that time. Middle of May, going into June, when Gurudev came here the first time. You know, so before my trip to Malaysia, she told me, I've met this devotee, and he actually agreed that he would like to host Srila Narayana Maharaj in his house, which he had in Walnut Creek, a nice, regular suburban 3-bedroom house. And but he wanted to meet me and discuss about it. So I drove up from, where was I living? Yeah, I was in LA, and I drove up from LA, and Kasturi, myself, sat with him and his wife, who later became Radhakanta and Ratikala. And we had a very nice, they made a little dinner, and then I told them all about Srila Narayana Maharaj, because they hadn't met him. And so then he agreed. He said, okay, I agree, yes. So that was in the bag. And then around that time, also somehow Tripurari Maharaj was contacted. He was living up in Eugene, Oregon. And so, yeah, he was interested in Shringa Maharaj and this other, what's his name, Vishnu Maharaj. They had a temple, actually, at that time. Gurudev was up there. So they also wanted to host. And then two more links. Seattle. Who was up in Seattle? Mithiladish and his son, Kishori Mohan. And they were collecting with t-shirt tables and stuff like that. Up there, they were somewhat connected with Nishringa Maharaj. Right? So, Kishori Mohan, that's a very wonderful story to hear from him, or from Sue Devi, because that's when Sue Devi was down in LA and she met Gurudev, and she's just called him up and said, I'm taking initiation from him. It was like love at first sight. You've probably heard her tell her story, you know. And then Kishore Maharaj was like, but you know. Anyway, Gurudev came and stayed a couple of days on his way to Vancouver, and snatched their hearts, put in his pocket, you know. Then he came and met Jagadish Prabhu, who was a GBC of the Gurukula in ISKCON, Prabhupada disciple, and he was living at the Sharanagati farm. And Gurudev went to actually meet him. He was having a very great difficulty, and he gave up his GBC is sannyas, this and that. But at least he had that relationship with Gurudev, and Gurudev was able to give a class or something there at that farm. So then from there, in the meantime, we all flew out to New York, because that was Gurudev's last stop before he would leave, go back to India via Holland. And Shamarani was with us, of course. She had a whole long list of names of persons who she knew through the years, devotees. And she's calling up on the phone for like 2-3 days straight. And the time is getting smaller and smaller before Gurudev arrives. And each person basically was saying, no, I can't do it for this reason or that, hosting. She's trying to find someone to host. And literally about 2 days before Gurudev is going to arrive, she calls one of the last names on the list. The person's name was Jairam Das. She knew him from the early New York temple days, not the earliest, but a couple of years after. Not 26 2nd Avenue, but the next place that they moved to. And he was an old devotee, disciple of Prabhupada. He's a musician, and his work was that he would go into Manhattan and stay for certain weekdays and play his music, and then he would come back. And so when she called him and proposed the idea, he said, oh yeah, I'll host Narayana Maharaj. He didn't really know him either, but he actually knew Bhakti Sundar Govinda Maharaj, who was at that time the, Acharya who had been appointed by Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj. And he had hosted him in his house. So he said, yeah, I'll host Narayana Maharaj. You can just take my whole house. I have a beautiful house in the suburbs, 1 mile away from Tawako, New Jersey ISKCON temple. And it's got like, ½ acre of land around it. And you can just come and stay. I won't be able to be there during the week because I have to go and work in Manhattan. So yeah, please take over. And not only that, but I have a brand new Chevy Suburban, vehicle, and you can use that for him. So like how Krishna arranged, just in the nick of time. All right, so going back to the article, because I'm explaining about that moment when Gurudev started to come down the elevator. Pran is describing that in LAX. And the day before, we didn't know that all these devotees were going to be flying in. But I was kind of like around the ISKCON temple in Watsika, and one after the other, devotees were flying in from LA and arriving, and they didn't really know where to go. And they went in front of the temple, and then I said, oh, Hare Krishna, Yeah, we just flew in from Holland. We were with Srila Gurudev in Holland. And so there was like 30 devotees that came to be on the tour with Gurudev in America, Maybe some of them also went to the Houston. I don't remember. Shamrani was one of them. That's when she wrote her goodbye letter. It's in her book. Yeah. So then the next day was the day when Gurudev would arrive. So all of the devotees, there were various cars, and we had like a whole caravan of about, 8 or 10 cars, vehicles, and everybody was being transported there. And then we went to the place in the airport where Gurudev was supposed to arrive, And so we stood at the bottom of the escalator, and we started to do kirtan. I was playing mridanga and leading the kirtan. And when Gurudev appeared at the top of the stairs, I'm just giving my impression, and then we'll hear Pran's. He was so effulgent. This is the first time since Srila Prabhupada departed in 1977, 20 years before, that a pure devotee of Krishna is arriving in the United States, And nobody knew what would be taking place, But somehow or other, we lined it up, we got a tour together, Gurudev came. And so when he was coming down, he had his turban, his hand on Naveen's shoulders, and I think Naveen was holding his danda. And then as he came down the stairs, our whole group was waiting at the bottom for him. And he was smiling when he saw all of us. So effulgent he was, actually. Unforgettable moment. I mean, I've been at the airport seeing Srila Prabhupada, you know. That's the first time I saw him, was when he arrived in 1971 at the airport in Detroit. And so my memory of that is one of the most powerful, you know, samskars that I have inside of me. Seeing Prabhupada for the very first time. So Gurudev, you know, he arrived, and then we walked him through the airport so that we would go on an elevator down to the ground level where the luggage would come in. And as we walked, they didn't stop us. We were just doing kirtan and walking with him. And then there came to an elevator, and we all, as many as could fit, squeezed into that elevator. And Gurudev was like this close, and I'm playing the mridanga and singing, you know, and Nitai Gauranga, Nitai Gauranga. And then came down the stairs, to the floor below. And then Gurudev, he was brought outside to his car that was waiting there, while they would get his luggages, Brajanath and others. And who was there outside? Rihari and Bhavatarini. They were doing kirtan, just the two of them. And, you know, somehow or other, we didn't come there exactly right then because we had to run and get our cars, you know, from the parking lot and all of that. So they were there. That's the first time they saw Gurudev. But then they didn't know. I mean, somehow they didn't know that Gurudev was going to be in LA and do programs, and then he's going to do a whole West Coast tour. I think I was the one that informed them, like I informed Rishabdev Prabhu about Gurudev's coming. But they missed Gurudev. I mean, they didn't know that all this was going on. They tell their story. How they missed like the first 2 years of Gurudev's preaching mission. But anyway, so Pran is saying, I will never forget how shortly thereafter we saw you disembarking out of the gate at LAX in 1996 for the first time. It was a completely surreal scene. A small group of devotees were nervously chanting, walking here and there, anxiously waiting to greet you. A kirtan slowly began as the people started coming through the gate. Finally, we saw you and Naveen Krishna Brahmachari from a distance. You were shining like the warm morning sun. You smiled widely when you saw all of us. The moment was perfectly captured by Gokul Prabhu as he snapped a photo of Champak Lata trying to place a garland on you as she wept and laughed simultaneously, utterly stunned to see you on Western soil. You and Naveen Prabhu laughed to see this. It was back in 1994 or 95 that Sripad Gaura Govinda Maharaj had told his disciples that a Prem Yuga would be coming, and it would begin in 1996. I remember hearing that because in 95, we were in Malaysia for the whole year. Pran and me and his family, and we were hearing from the Gaura Govinda Maharaj disciples that very year because he passed away the beginning of 96. And they were telling about how he was predicting that a Prem Yuga is coming in 1996, right? So, it was a prophecy that none of us understood at that time. It didn't take long after your arrival in 1996 to understand what Sripad Gaura Govinda Maharaj had seen in his transcendental vision. Soon after your arrival, a massive flood of bhakti would envelop the planet again. A second wave, a second explosion, coming after the departure of our beloved Srila Prabhupada. Yeah. So I was in Taiwan at the end of February, and I was on my way back to California, and I was staying in some hotel guest house, and they told me I had a phone call. So I came into their lobby and I sat down and answered the phone. It was Pran Kishor calling me up. I think he was, I'm not sure whether he was in Malaysia at the time. I think it was in Malaysia. And he's calling me up. He just received the news that Srila Govinda Maharaj had left. So he said to me, I have some very heavy news. You know, Srila Govinda Maharaj has left the planet. I said, what? And he started explaining, just very suddenly, in Mayapur, as he was speaking Krishna Katha, he just leaned back on his bed, and within a few moments, he left his body. I said, really? You know, because Govinda Maharaj was not that old, and his health was not, you know, hampering him. So, yeah, I mean, that was very, he chose. But it was very, the way that news affected me, because I actually had a plan. I'd never personally, I saw him one time when he came to LA, and he was speaking in the temple, like 1 or 2 years before that. But I'd never personally met him and all that. But by living in Malaysia, and we had association with at least about 1 or 2 dozen Gaura Govinda Maharaj disciples. And we would even go to programs with them. And they would tell us so many things about Gaura Govinda Maharaj. So during that year, I also listened to some of his Katha on tape recorded, you know, and I began to feel that, wow, he's a pure devotee, you know. And I thought, oh, I should at least meet him. I'm with Gurudev, but I should at least meet him, you know, and take advantage of his sangha to some extent. So when I heard that he suddenly left, that struck me very deeply. And, well, first I'll tell what Pran Kishor said next. And then he said, listen, I also have some very, you know, amazing news to tell you as well. And I said, oh, what is that? And then he said, are you sitting down? I said, yes. Then he said, Gurudev is coming to the West. And as soon as I heard that, I says, when? Where is he coming? You know, he's first going to Europe, then he's coming to America. I said, really? And then I said, I'm going on the tour with him, you know. And anyway, after that conversation, I went upstairs to the room that I was renting, and I had Gaura Govinda Maharaj's book that had just been printed in Malaysia, which was called The Embankment of Separation. And I opened up the book to a picture of him. Then I performed Guru Puja to him. So, second wave. Yeah, we were hearing from the disciples that Gaura Govinda Maharaj had predicted. He said also, Pran didn't mention it here, but he said, 1996, Prem Yuga will begin. And then he also would say, the Acharya will manifest then. And all of Gaura Govinda Maharaj's disciples, because he predicted that like a year before he left, they all thought, well, that'll be him. That'll be him. And just see what happened. Srila Gurudev, within a couple of months after the departure, he became the Acharya, you know. So, he said, then Pran Kishor said, I was fortunate that first year in that I was able to be your driver. and I drove you all over California. You know, we have a running joke between Pran and me and a few others. Because I didn't, you know, there was no one that had a really nice, suitable vehicle for Gurudev. You know? We all had old beat-up cars, you know? So I went to an auction for the very first time in my life, of an automobile auction in Bakersfield. And I'm looking at the cars, and then all of a sudden a Lincoln Continental town car, beautiful blue color, really shiny and nice, older, like a boat, but it was, you know, and it was affordable. I could purchase, so I purchased it. And I was thinking that I'm going to drive Gurudev in this car all over his touring, you know. Gurudev never once sat in it, because Ram Das from the Bay Area, you know, disciple of Srila Bhakti Pramod Puri Maharaj, he donated his van to be used for Gurudev's tour. So that's the van that Pran was using. So anyway, I served the other devotees, and they all floated along with me on the freeways, you know. Now, he says, I was able to be with you here and there, and also throughout the Far East, those first few years. I witnessed firsthand the transformations devotees would go through after hearing your Hari Katha for only 2 or 3 days. I watched grown men and women, God brothers and God sisters, stand before you, weep uncontrollably, and then fall at your feet. One devotee could only utter the words, thank you, weeping and weeping. You smiled lovingly, you put your hand on his head, and you said, I wanted this. What's he speaking of, Gurudev? I wanted this, he said to that Prabhupada disciple. He wanted to help all the Prabhupada disciples, because Prabhupada personally requested him this. And he told that many times over the years. I wanted this. Only a resident of Braj, a parikar of Sri Radha, and an intimate associate of Sri Rupa could perform such magic on the hearts of devotees everywhere. O Gurudev, dear friend, this is his last paragraph. O Gurudev, dear friend, dear master, you told me once that Srila Prabhupada was Satya Sankalpa. Gurudev would say this on his first tour a lot. Satya Sankalpa means what? What he says, it will come to pass. So one time in Mathura, you asked me if I were happy. And I asked you why. You said that if I were not happy, that you would personally begin a court case against Krishna on the side of Srimati Radhika. You said that Krishna promised in the Bhagavad Gita that if his devotee serves him, then that devotee must become happy forever. So if I were not happy, then you would take Krishna to court for not telling the truth. Just after this, I became a little emotional, and I told you that if I had to take birth again, I might be directed to another guru. I told you that I never wanted to be separated from you. You took my hands and promised me that you would find me. You said that we would always be together and that you would never let me go. You are Satya Sankalpa. Your words must become truth. They are all I have now to keep me alive. All other prospects are now bleak and meaningless. The only thing of value is to be with you eternally. Please find me, Gurudev. Please look for me, even if I stray to weakness. You are my only hope. Destitute and shattered, your Pran Kishor Das. Jai Srila Gurudev Ki Jai. Srila Gurudev Avirbhav Mahamahotsav Titi Ki Jai. Jai Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Shri Rupanuga Guru Varga Ki Jai. Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Nitai Gaur Premanande. Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo. So tomorrow, is Jaigo still there? What is the schedule tomorrow?
Narayana Prabhu wants to also give Bhagavatam class at 8.
At
So,
8.
8 to 9. And
8 till 9.
Yeah, and then at 10 we will start the bhajans for the program till, I assume it's going to go till like maybe 2:30 or maybe 3 because there's maybe a lot of speakers.
At what time? 10?
Yeah,
You're
10
gonna
the
start?
bhajans,
Okay.
and then around 11:30 speaking until like maybe 2:30 or 3.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
like,
Also, if anybody would like to make garlands at 8 in the morning,